Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today on the Revamp Your Reporting Skills using XRL. If you haven't heard from myself before, I'm Rachel Gray. I'm the Technical Services Manager here at HBP. And as some of you may know, I've been here for around 11 years, also on the Pegasus Help Desk and XRL. So the plan for today is really to make sure everybody has a little bit of a refresh for the new year on XRL, making sure everybody has a bit of a chance to maybe create some new reports, use it for data investigations, or maybe even really actually revamp how we're browsing around the reports, exactly how we need to use them, and really probably hopefully making a few things easier to use. So what I'd like to ask is, obviously before we start, is I am going to go through the presentation. If we can, where possible, leave any questions to the end, but then we'll take some time to go through questions. You should all have a Q&A section on the webinar, so feel free if you wanted to type them as we go, and then I can have a look through them once we finish the presentation. So the plan for today is what I would like to go through is firstly the common reporting types and usages, because XRL can be quite complicated depending on how you start using the report. So what I want to do today is make sure everyone has a really easy process to start with and can start getting some general data out of the system. What we're then going to go on to is basic report creation using filters and calculations. So how do we drill down? How do we extract the specific parts of the data that we need? What I'm going to do is have a look at menu selectors. So how can we make reports able to be used between multiple data sets? So it might be you've got multiple companies within Pegasus Opera 3. So if we're creating a report, what we don't want to do is continually duplicate that report. Let's create it so it can refresh with the live data of any of the companies that you have access to. And then the end plan will then be have a look at how we can format those reports, add in some little quirky macros, make it easier to navigate. And for those people that maybe don't have very much skill on XRL, it will allow them to recalculate the data, browse around and navigate much easier. So what I want to do is obviously start from the beginning in terms of let's create a brand new worksheet and start from the beginning. So when it comes to creating an XRL report, what are we first looking for? Well, as you all know, the Info Query and Analysis add-on will be the add-on for extracting your XRL data. And we've got a multitude of different options on the menu. Now, if you haven't come across these recently, there are many, many options on that menu, and I'm going to concentrate on the ones that you are going to use day to day for when we're looking at data and exported information. And they all exist in this area here called Cell. The four main options are reference link, summary report, and detailed report, which right now I'm sure you're thinking, what do they mean? And I will assure you we'll be able to get through that and show you exactly the best way to use those. So what I'm first going to do is I'm actually going to focus on a detailed report. So in the name, what a detailed report means is there's no filters, there's no summarising of information. It is going to export the exact detail you have asked for in the tables. So by clicking the detailed report option, you can see my XRL screen then becomes alive. And we now need to just start thinking about initially, what company do we want to use? And then also the module and the tables that we want to use as well. Now, if anybody's been on one of my XRL demos previously, what I've always tried to say is when we're looking at Opera, the best thing to do in order to then decide which tables and which information we need to extract the data is to almost think of how you would get to that data and swap it around so it's back to front. So for example, and I'm actually going to briefly open Opera for everybody just to show a bit of a theory on this before we continue as well. So for example, in XRL, if we want to see transactional details for the sales ledger, what we would do in Opera is go into our financials module, onto the sales processing screen, and then into action, and on a specific customer, we might go view an account, then choose if we want to see all on outstanding, and then choose the transactions. Now, how that translates into XRL is as follows. So let's bring our detailed report back up, and we'll also bring our Excel spreadsheet back up as well. So if I choose my table, and in the sales ledger, I have multiple different areas. So where I said previously we went into sales, we went into processing. So that's your account header. That's the initial information you're going to see when you launch that screen and launch that account. You then have the transactions table. So that's obviously the second option we went into in Opera 3. So if I want to see transactional details, what I wouldn't do is go into accounts, because if we launch that table now, you'll see the only information I have access to is accounts information. There are no transactional details, no values for transactions or transaction references. If I change my table by double clicking on my table area again, and instead choose transactions and OK, my view changes. So now I can see my transactional information. I've got date, reference, customer reference, but I can also drill backwards into accounts. So it's just a little bit of a handy tip, is start from where you would end up in Opera, and you will have access to everything at the higher level as well. So let's actually have an example of a detailed report using transaction data. So I would like to have the account code in a report. So what we're going to do is we're going to either double click or drag it across to the output section. And the output section is what I'm going to see on my report. So we can then double click or drag the date of the transaction, my reference for my transaction and customer reference. I may want to see the type of transaction, the value, and the VAT value. Now, at the moment, I'm going to ask for everything. I've got no filters, I've got no date ranges on that. If I purely select OK to that report, you'll see it take a moment and it will calculate and give me all of those details. Scrolling down to the bottom, as you can see, I've got many years worth of data in here, so obviously not ideal if we're wanting to minimise the amount of data we've got. And we'll come on to actually making sure that data is more specific for my requirements. But what I'm now going to do is, having created a detailed report, so exported everything regardless of what information's in there, what I'd like to now show you is the difference between a detailed report and a summary report. So I'm going to choose a different cell where I would like my report to start and select summary report. Now I will again get the exact same screen in terms of choosing my criteria and output. So I'm going to mimic what I had, double click on table to choose my module, expand the module I would like, and you will see a key difference here in that I can only access tables that have some kind of value. And the reason being is because a detailed report will allow you again to export everything, but that's regardless of the kind of data it's held. So it's not purely looking for calculator fields or values. It's looking for date fields, text fields, any field that's available in Opera. What a summary report does is purely looks for value and calculation fields, because ideally what the report is going to try and do is, rather than outputting every single line, it's going to try and summarise each line dependent on the information I've put out. So I'll give you an example here. Let's go for sales transactions again. So I am still going to get the same information I had, but you'll see any fields that the system will summarise on are highlighted in red. They're my value and calculation fields. But let's actually pull out absolutely everything of what we created in the detailed report. So I'm happy with my output and select OK. Now what you will see is the information we get back is identical, and that's because I've chosen multiple different options that are really unique. And so we're looking for unique identifiers and how we can summarise. So if we go back into our account, and that's highlighting the very first cell my report was created on, and you'll see has this equation, is the indicator of where my XRL report is available again. Double clicking that field will relaunch my XRL report and allow me to edit everything that I've entered into that system. So what I'm actually going to do is remove the date, remove the reference, and remove the customer reference. select OK to my report again. And this time it's summarised. So we can see for our ADA 0001 account, I've got a balance forward transaction. On my ALI 0005, I have adjustments and a total, invoices and a total, and receipts and a total. So it's actually broken down and summarised the report based on that criteria. If I go back to my detailed report, so again, the first cell of my report is where I have access to the XRL data. Double click on that cell, and I'm back into my report. And I'm again going to remove from this one the date, the reference and the customer reference, and select OK. And what we will see from here is it won't make any difference or change to the amount of rows and details that are exported. It is still going to give me line by line every transaction that meets my criteria. So there really we have quite a contrast in the two types of reports those are showing. The detailed report, absolutely everything. A summary report will try and summarise on the information you've selected to give more meaningful and totaled results. Now, depending on what sort of report you may want, obviously it will all depend on what sort of report is actually best for yourself. What I'm then going to do is show you an example of how the two types can actually interact when it comes to using the second two elements that we mentioned, which is summary link and reference link. So the difference between these is a detailed report and summary report will export a report format. We will have headings, we will have totals, we will have lines in between, and it will be in a reportable format. Where reference links and summary links come into play is that they will use the data that's already on the Excel spreadsheet in order to output results. And here's a really good example of that. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to create a detailed report on my page. And again, I'm going to leave my company as Company Z. Under Table, I'm again going to pick on the sales ledger again. And this time I'm going to choose Accounts, because what I would like to output is every account and the description that I have in my system, and select OK. So for things, for example, contact lists, contact details, exporting just pure lists of data, detailed report is absolutely great. What I'm then going to do is now I've got a list of all of my data, I'm going to say, OK, what specific information would I like to pull through that may exist in a completely different table? So using a summary link, which is a value link. So as we can see, it's got a little summary table. So what this summary link is going to look for is any table, very much like the summary report, that holds a value. So leaving our company ID the same, going into table and sales, and I actually would like to pull through my transaction table. And what I would like to say, let's say I want to see the balance, so pull through balance onto the output. But what do I want to actually then say that links to? Well, what I would like the system to do is I want to base my balance output, which is this cell here, on the account in that same row. So what we're going to do now is introduce the filter section. So this is where we start building the criteria and really get into grips with the information that we're exporting. So I'm going to take my account field and actually bring it up, drag and drop into the filter section. And we have a filter from and a filter to. Now I'm not going to enter any details in here. What I'm then going to do is, while my cursor is in the filter from section, I'm going to move onto the Excel sheet and highlight the first row of actual data I want to look at. And as you can see, it references the field and it tells me what information is in that field. If I then, in my filter to box, drop my cursor with a single click, it then says, OK, so the information you want to look at is in cell B5. Yes, it is. That's exactly what I want. So I'm going to say OK. So straight away, it's given me the balance of all of my transactions for that account. What I'm then going to do is I would like that exact same report to be applicable to every row in this sheet. So if we hover over the bottom right-hand corner of my cell, and I can either left click and drag, or I can double left click in that corner, it will populate that same equation all the way down to the end of the report. Now, as you can see from this point, it's, well, that's all the same data. And what we now need to do is actually get the system to recalculate. So using the recalculate option at the top, I'm going to drop that option down. I'm going to say recalculate range. And so that's going to go through every single cell, as you see, and very quickly recalculate based on my information in this cell. So now I have really a very crude debtors report, because this is a total debt for all of my customers in the system. So that's where joining these reports begins to build really exactly what you need in the system. What we can then do is we can go a step further. So maybe I don't want a total debt forever. I want it broken down by month. So at the very top, what I'm going to start doing is actually building filters and building criteria. So let's go back to firstly our original 2 reports. So if I wanted to build further filters and further information on the details, how would I go about doing that? Well, firstly, let's go into our detailed report, our line by line report, so we can really see what effect this has. So originally in the detail, I have my output, I have absolutely nothing in the filter column. So this is where we then start to think about, well, how do I want to restrict and limit the data that's available to me so I can really see exactly what information I need? Well, that's where we start to pull through the information. So in my report here, as you can see, I've got a type column, and the type dictates the type of transaction we're looking at. So it might well be that all I want to see are my invoices and credit notes for this report. So let's take the type, single click, drag and release up to the filter section, and it will say, great, what would you like to filter on? And this time I'm going to choose filter from, my little ellipse button, and it will give me all of the options in the system. And then I'm going to choose invoice and say OK. So straight away we should see the results recalculated immediately, and the only detail that that's pulling through are all of my invoice transactions. If we do the same on the summary report and bring our type across, up at the top, choose invoice and say OK. Again, exact same results, but now we have a invoice total for every customer rather than a line for every customer and the invoice total for each line. So again, a good variation between detailed and summary report, but it's how we can then start building and really creating the information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to really build that and bring that all into one report. So creating our reports, using our summary link, and also using filters. So for that, I'm going to create another sheet. And firstly, what I'd like to do is create a debtors report, but by month of due date. So firstly, what I'm going to do is, rather than creating a detailed report, I'm going to choose a summary report. And again, the sales ledger and transactions. Now again, remember at the start, what we did say is that if we choose the transaction table, we can go back in and get into the accounts details. Now for this report, the reason why I've chosen the transaction table is, rather than having a report of every single account, because we know there are thousands of accounts potentially and not all of them with a balance. So what I'm going to do in this report is say, well, actually only give me customers where there is a balance greater than 0. So I'm going to choose my account as my output. And if we go into the transaction table and then into accounts, we can then choose the account name. And then in balance, bring my balance up to the top, and using logical equations, use my greater than symbol and 0. Just so we can see how that looks, I'm actually going to include balance as well and select OK. So that gives me a report of every single customer who has a balance greater than 0. So then we can start to build on that using filters and using reference links. So if this is my total balance, what date range do I want to use and break down into month on month? So let's start from the 1st of the 1st, 2018. At the very top of my report, or in a place that is similar to the column output I would like, I'm going to put my first date, and in the column and the row below that, I'm going to put my end date. I'm going to do the same in the next. And then using just Excel functionality, I can highlight and drag those across to populate the rest of the dates that I wish to see. And we'll just do a resize so we can see that information. Okay, so I now have an idea, column by column, the dates I would like to use to filter my balance. So I'm now going to select the first row and the first column I would like some data to be outputted. So I'm going to go now up to the top again and use my summary link. And again, choose my table. I'm going to head for sales transactions again. This time, very much like the second report created, we're going to filter by account and choose the field we wish to view. I'm going to pull through the balance value as my output, but I'm also going to find my due date. Again, pull this to the top of my filter report, and this time we're going to choose our first date for our column. So E1, select filter 2, choose a second row to select, and say OK. So currently it's telling me, as at January 2018, there were no transactions where the due date was between these dates. So to populate the information, we don't need to create this multiple times. I'm first, with my little cross symbol, going to drag this across the dates I would like to view. I'm going to use the cross symbol again and double click to populate it down to the bottom. Now at this moment in time, we can click on any one of these fields, and as you can see, the XRL report is available, and even highlighting double checks the row that it's looking at. We can at any one of these double click into an individual field now, and as you can see, it has fully populated that information with the XRL report. And what I'm now going to do is again using the recalculate, so that's refreshing the data and refreshing all of the reports on this worksheet. I'm going to choose recalculate worksheet. Now with the number of cells on here, as you can imagine, it just takes a few minutes, but down at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, you do see a progress of how quickly that is refreshing. And straight away now, I have a very simple report that gives me my total balance for all of my customers, but then broken down by each month due date on when those were due to be paid. It's a really simple use of those functionalities with regards to the reporting and the filters that are available. So hopefully you can see by applying that same rule and same methodology to the different modules within the system, the same sort of reports can be created very easily. Now, the next item on the agenda is that this is a fantastic report, but what if we want it to be able to convert to multiple different companies or multiple different options across my entire business in Opera? So this is where we start to create individual menu structures. And really what I mean is that rather than having to go into every single one of these reports and change the company I wish it to point to, it might be the date I'm looking for, it might be the due date, I want to be able to change it on my Excel spreadsheet and have the system recalculate. And that's exactly what we're going to show next. So again, we'll create another report. Start from fresh, and this time it might be I want to see sales order lines, for example, by an account. Firstly, before I create the report, this is where we need to have a think about is what sort of information do I want to filter on, and what sort of information will I find easy if I have the ability to change it on my sheet. Well, the first one is company. It might be I have multiple companies in my Opera system, so therefore I want the option to decide which company I'm running this report on. If we're looking at orders or due orders by account, I'll want to filter by account. account field in there. Again, this is me just manually typing the information. And to begin with, and this is a key point when we are creating filters, is typing all with the greater than, less than fields will ensure all options to begin with are encompassed when we use this as a filter. It might also be I want the date from the date too. Let's say 2018 to 31st the 12th 2019. So really all we're doing at the moment is starting to build the initial report. So then I'm going to choose where I would like the report to start from, and again decide what sort of report is going to best fit this information. Well, because in this point what I would like to do is export the order lines that aren't yet invoiced. I would like a detailed report because I don't want to summarise, I want to see each individual line. So that's where we'll choose a detailed report. Now this time, even before we get to the output, is also where we can start using our menu. So for company ID, if I use the same method and choose the cell that actually reflects that information, you'll see it's set to C1 and company Z. It allows me to set that as an option. And I'm going to use table, and this time I'm going to use invoicing and SOP, and I'm actually going to have a look at transactions. So the information I would like to see, so we have a document reference number. We can also pull through under the I header, the account and the account name, stock reference, the description of the stock reference. We may want to see the analysis code that stock reference is posting to, the line quantity. We may want to see the item price, the value of the line, and the date. Now, that's actually a very in order way of choosing the fields. We can, in this output section, change the order. So actually, I would quite like the account first and the name. So selecting the field and dragging it into a different order. I do want the document, the stock reference and the description. I would, however, just after document date, would like the date. So we have the line quantity, item price, and line value. So then, using the menu we created earlier, I'm going to then start creating filters. So if I move my account up to my filter, as you can see, I could choose it as a static option in this report, but I'm instead going to choose to select a certain field. And again for the date, pull that across, date from, and then because I have multiple fields for this to look at, I'm then going to tab in and choose date to. Now, because I then want to see everything that's still at the order stage, what I'm also going to do is under my header information, so that's the first page of an order and the transactions is the second detail page, I want to pull through the status of this order. So I might actually want the sales order itself. And I would like to see that again just before document. And I also want to find the status. So the status is if O for order, D for delivered, I for invoiced. Now, when you're looking through these fields, just remember that there's absolutely nothing that you can break in Opera data when you're pulling through this information. So pull as many fields through as you want. You can always come back in and simply remove them by dragging them out of this section. So I'm looking for status. There it is at the quite a little bit far down. So we can double click status and add that in. And again, I would like to have my status and say, OK, I want it to be orders only. So now, just to recap on the report, so I'm looking at a company ID dictated by the Excel spreadsheet. I'm looking at an account, currently all of them, but can be dictated by the Excel spreadsheet. I'm looking between certain dates and I'm looking for the status. Now, there's one thing I have done on here is that technically this is the wrong date, and what I want to show you is how to create the date as it stands and then pull through a different date and really not affect how the report's running at all. So let's say OK to that report. Again, it should take around a couple of seconds to refresh, And straight away what we there have is all of my accounts with the current orders on the system, and the status is order, so they haven't gone to delivery and they haven't gone to invoice. Absolutely fantastic. So now we can start looking at the details and go, do I need everything on that report? Do I want to format anything or change any options? Well, really, I don't need the status column. Is that messing up my report slightly? It could be analysis code isn't needed, or we could even need extra information. So to go back in again, the first field of the report, double click, reopens the report as it is, and we can simply add or remove certain columns and fields that we've added. Bearing in mind we used status at the top, the filter sections do not need to be an output option, so you can filter on as many different variables as you wish, and it might be you're only actually outputting 2 fields and 2 sets of data. So we'll say OK to that again. And there it's refreshed. Now what that is really handy for is by using these fields to create my